Well, welcome YouTube friends and family to today's edition of the Wellness Homesteader. So first, thank you all so much for your feedback on whether or not you would like to learn a little bit about sewing or sewing with vintage patterns. So today, for this part of the video, I want to share with you a vintage Christmas circle skirt I made. And we're going to be talking about this. So I do have a crinoline underneath to make it nice and poofy. And this is just super sassy 50s, and I absolutely love it. So maybe you want to get started with sewing and you like some of the vintage styles like I do. Where to begin? How do you know what size to pick? And what does all that mean on a pattern? Stay tuned for more information. Whether or not you're a seamstress or you have any interest at all in sewing a vintage style modern pattern or a true vintage pattern, I think you'll find some of the information in today's video pretty interesting, especially when we talk about sizing. So I have in front of me an example of one of my vintage patterns. Guys, I have a ton, and I will be sharing these with you when I do vintage sewing videos. So this one, if you had to guess the year, you would probably say 50s. It's actually 1961, so it's from the year I was born. So as you see, it has the nipped-in waist, a very full skirt, a longer sleeve, and also the armholes are not set in. It's a little bit of a dropped underarm. So that was a very common style. So whether or not you want to sew vintage, I mean, who doesn't think that's beautiful? This pattern envelope has definitely seen better days, and that's one of the things about sewing with vintage, and I'm going to share a couple tips and tricks with you as we go along. So anything that is 100 years old or older is considered antique. Anything 50 to 100 is considered vintage. So these are vintage, not antique patterns. And depending on the source, they may say anything 60s back is vintage, or even 70s back is vintage. So it kind of depends on an individual's definition. These are truly vintage. Styles really changed dramatically between the 20s and the 60s. So think about the 20s, the flapper dresses, they were very androgynous, so very straight up and down. They were glamorous, they were very highly accessorized, and Coco Chanel was actually a big influence on the 1920s style. In the 30s, the styles became a little more feminine, that less straight up and down androgynous look. And because of the Depression, they used smaller pieces, so less excess fabric was needed to sew, a piece of clothing. In the 40s, that changed again, and we got the exaggerated shoulders with the big poofy shoulder pads, pardon me. And World War II created shortages, of course, in fabric, and money after the Depression. So it created a whole new generation of home sewers, and they were quite creative in the different fabrics that they would use. So think flour sacks were changed, the print was changed so people could start making clothing items from flour sacks. Post-war, in the 40s, Christian Dior was big and the styles were much more romantic. And then we get to the 50s, my favorite era. And that was the very full skirts, the very nipped in waist. And then also, converse to that, were what is often called a pencil skirt, a pencil dress, or a wiggle skirt. So why was it called a wiggle skirt? Because of the cut and it being very narrow at the hem, women had to take shorter steps, which caused them to wiggle. So at my age, I'm not really into wiggle dresses. I pretty much like the big poofy flared outlook. That's a little more my style. In the 60s, of course, we had the explosion of styles. So we had everything from the very traditional to all that British mod, mini skirts. There was so many new fabrics, so many new designs, and it just was really a change in the pattern industry. So if you find a beautiful vintage pattern, so where do you find these? Maybe I should cover that. Etsy, eBay, thrift stores, Goodwills, antique stores often will have them as well. Raid your mom and grandma's sewing stash, garage sales, estate sales. They're pretty plentiful because they were in great supply, so it's not a scarcity item. What I will say is and let me just open this one to show you. The tissue as well as the instruction paper becomes very brittle. And this one is quite yellowed with age. So let me just show you. For example, you get the big instructions like you do in today's modern patterns, but you can see how yellowed it is. And several of my vintage patterns need to be reinforced along these lines with acid-free tape, for sure. We did not have acid-free paper back then. And here's just an example of one of the pieces, and you can see that it is also quite yellowed, although most patterns are sort of that beige color. So what can you do besides preserving them in an acid-free environment? Well, one of the things you can do, and I want to give a shout out to Miss Gay over at Apron Strings because this was a great idea. She irons them to inexpensive fusible interfacing, so it preserves the pattern and shape, and you don't have to worry. Even if it deteriorates, you still have the shape you need to cut out. So how are vintage patterns different from today's? Guys, we're going to talk at length about this. Number one thing is sizing. So I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to circle around to it. Another difference is generally just one size per pattern. So today's modern patterns often will have, for example, this has sizes 6 to 22. So it makes it very easy if you need to alter your pattern. Let's say you have a bigger chest and a smaller waist, then you can go up a size on the chest portion and down a size on the waist because you have all the markings on the pattern. When you are using a vintage pattern, you have to learn to grade or figure out how to enlarge or make smaller the pattern on your own because you won't have those guides to go. Also, I would say implied instructions, and this is my terminology. A lot of the patterns assume you already know how to do things. It's not going to tell you how to put in a zipper. It may not tell you a lot of basic instructions you will find in today's patterns because it assumes you already know. Another thing, let's just say, for example, you want to create a round neck blouse. Many of the very old patterns will not have the facing piece, so the inside piece, and that is actually sleeve facing that I just held up, that you would sew together and then turn in and top stitch, and it makes that finished edge to the garment rather than just a raw. They assume that you know how to draft that as well. But I'm going to talk about solutions if you want that vintage style without having to buy a vintage pattern. Pardon me. They also used different symbols than today's patterns. So a lot of times you'll look at a pattern and it's got all these dots and it doesn't really explain what they're for. So it's helpful to know that 3 dots represent waistline, etc., etc. And you can just simply do a Google search if you're uncertain what a certain symbol might mean on your pattern. Body shapes have also changed dramatically through history, especially the bust to waist ratio. It decreased, waist size did in the 60s, and in the 50s also. They were just, it needs so much more fabric. So as we switched from the 20s, thinner straight up and down, Depression wore thinner people, and then we've kind of evolved into a larger culture. Just saying, sizing and ratios are not all the same. So here's my tip, guys. Don't worry about what the number says on the pattern. And I'm going to share with you guys my size and why I have to buy what I have to buy. Measure yourself well with a soft tape measure and buy what's going to fit unless you're expert at alterations. Otherwise, you're going to spend all the time, energy, effort, and money, and you're going to end up with something that is likely going to be too small. And I'm going to go into that in just a moment. So I call it vanity sizing. So here we go. Sizing in general. Today's size 12 was yesterday's size 16. 1940s, size 10. Take a guess what size that would be in today's sizing. A 2. So size 10 to a size 2. So pattern sizes changed 4 times up until 1972, at which time it's been the same since then. And I will also share with you guys, if you've never sewn clothing before, pattern sizes are not the same as off the rack sizing at all. Again, measure yourself. Don't worry about the number. And again, I'm going to share that with you because it's just a number, guys. It doesn't really matter. The clothes are the same size, whether you have vanity sizing or old-fashioned sizing. It does not really matter. So in 1931, and I'm not, I hope this isn't like offensive to anybody. The bust sizing was a 34 for, this is size 16, guys, 16. So I normally wear like about a 8 on the bottom and a 10 on the top in today's sizing. So a size 16 in 1931 was measurements 34, 28, 37. Okay, I wish I was that, just saying. In 1956, it changed, and the bust size got larger, as did the hips, 36, 28, 38. In 67, we were all getting bigger again, 38, 29, and 40. And in 1972, for the final change, a size 16. A size 16, guys, is a bust measurement of 38, a waist of 30, and hips of 40. So, I need a size 18. It's a little embarrassing in a way. I know when I first got into vintage clothing and I was trying stuff on, I was like, how can I not wear this? It's like a 12 or a 14. No, I need an 18 to fit comfortably on the top, and then I can take it in if I need to in the waist and hips. So again, our vanity sizes have really gotten us. So there's different types of sewing if you like that vintage look. You can go online and just search for free vintage sewing pattern. Guys, there's tons of them. I actually made my Christmas skirt from a free pattern, but I want to show you. So let me stand up. Oh, goodness, kicked my ring light there. So you actually go in, you download the pattern. It will give you, let me just show you. I'm going to just hold this out here. The finish measurements, it will give you a size chart, it will give you a layout, and it will give you some pretty good directions is what I've always found. However, you're printing this off on 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper. So, let me just show you. And Frankie is in love with laying on this. Can y'all see how many sheets of paper I have taped together? Yes, it's a pretty good shot. To just get one pattern piece. So a circle skirt, guys, tons of fabric. Takes about 4 yards to make a circle skirt, but I could not be, more pleased. I've got to figure out how I'm going to store that. My four-legged assistant, every time he hears the pattern rattle, he's like, I'll come help you, Mom. So let me just show you the finished skirt once again. So it is a 1-piece front, a 2-piece back. It does have a zipper. It has a hook and eye closure. And I also did use the pocket option. So I have pockets here that are of the same fabric. And you already saw the fit. So, what size did I need? In a modern sewing pattern, I needed a size 12. So let me sit this over here. So that's one way to sew a vintage outfit. Here's the second vintage item that I have promised I'm going to show. So let me show you the back first before I ruin the beautiful bow. So this is my Christmas hostess apron that I just finished. And it's a candy cane striped fabric. It has cookies on the pocket. The hem is scalloped. Oh, there we go, yeah. And that is some of the vintage trim that I purchased at the Goodwill. So, what can I tell you about this little hostess apron? It took 2 yards of fabric. And it's kind of one size fits all. I'm just going to loop this over once and show you. As you can see, whoops, that's the tie. This took a lot of fabric to make that full look. So follow the recommendations for how much fabric you need to a T. So this is a vintage reproduction pattern, not a true vintage pattern. Sizing didn't really matter there. So what is the next kind of pattern? So we've talked about true vintage, free vintage remakes. Both Butterick and Simplicity have a whole line, guys, now of these lovely vintage reproduction dresses. So Butterick calls it retro. Simplicity, and I didn't bring one, calls it vintage. So this sizing is like it is for all patterns past 1972. But as you can see, 14, 16, da-da-da-da-da. Wait, I'm sorry. Butterick, thankfully I ordered the right thing. Butterick is true vintage sizing. So on the flap, guys, it will tell you if your bust, waist, hips, or whatever, this is what you need. And you have to look at your pattern. So is the hip measurement going to matter here? No, it's so full, it doesn't matter. So in spite of the fact that I have small hips, it has to fit me on top. That's where I usually have the struggle. So another difference. There were not the fabrics back then that there are today. So many true vintage patterns, when you look at suggested fabrics, and I'm going to read this to you: printed silk or cotton, plaids, checks, lightweight wool, linen, synthetic mixtures, because it was 61. For the collar, linen or cotton broadcloth. So, did you see polyester? Did you see spandex? Did you see viscose and all of the other new fabrics? No. So you're going to have to read what the recommended fabric is to know whether or not something stretchy is going to work. So some of them will say, especially on the vintage remakes. So this one says, fabrics designed for lightweight woven fabrics, linen, taffeta, pique, brocade, unsuitable for obvious diagonals. Okay, so we're not going to be making that one. I brought some fabric down here, guys. So here's what I want to ask all of you all. So now that you all know, and you can spread around all over the internet, Kim wears size 18 better. I am going to make myself a vintage dress. Now, I'm not going to bore y'all with like all the particulars, but I would like to sew from a true vintage pattern. So this one, and okay, yeah, it's falling apart, guys, has been cut. And let's see, it's like so falling apart. The dress is 9 pieces. Huh. You know what? I got some other directions in here. Ooh, I got a 2 for guys. Huh, how about that? Well, that's pretty exciting. So I thought I would let you all pick which pattern you'd like to see me make. So this is a true vintage. And this I would need to sew. Let me look again. I'm trying to remember what I bought. Okay. I have this lovely blue plaid that I think I can do out of this. And I found some awesome pearl buttons. Or would you like to see me make? Is this the one that said not extra fabric? Okay. Well, this is not suited for obvious diagonals. Okay. Well, that's a real bummer. Let me just do it this way. Would you like to see me make this retro reproduction pattern? And I will purchase some new fabric since I didn't clearly read the directions. So option A, and I would do this view. Option B, A or B. And that just gives me an excuse to go to the fabric store and buy more fabric. So if you have questions, something I did not cover, you're interested in maybe making a simple or even a complicated vintage style pattern to bring back some of those great memories that we all have of our childhood if we're of a certain age, please feel free to drop it in the comment box below. You can, if it's lengthy or you don't want to put it like out there, you can always email me at sweethoneybath@gmail.com. I love getting all your comments. So if you haven't already, please like. If you're not subscribed, I'd love to have you. Hit the subscribe button, ring the bell, and select all to be notified of all the new uploads. If you know someone who would be interested in some of this vintage sewing, I would love it if you would share my video. I'm really trying to grow my channel, guys. I've been just growing by tiny, tiny little inches. And, you know, it was a year in August, and I'd really like to see my channel grow. And I know it's great subscribers like you that can help me. So as always, be healthy, be well, be blessed. And I will see you all probably in the sewing room in a few days. Take care.